Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kirti Patel. Here we place women's health and feminism front and center where they belong, engaging in conversations that range from the fundamental to the fearless. With insights from expert guests, we aim to break through the barriers of the patriarchy and envision a new world led by the Gynarchy. So let's get started and dive right in. Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kirti Patel. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, declines in marriage and childbirth rates. And I have a special guest. Her name is Jody Willson. She was a business attorney in San Francisco for over 20 years. Has done pro bono work as a family law attorney, and is now a high conflict divorce expert and coach, a family court reform activist, and a legislative policy influencer. So thank you so much for joining me, Jody. I'm so honored to have you.
Well, thank you for having me on the Gynarchy Podcast. I understand that this is your first summer doing this, so I'm excited to be part of it.
That's right. You're very brave. You're very brave to take this chance with me. I appreciate it. You know, we connected on Twitter, and I thought from your background, you'd have a lot of insight about marriage from your experience. And this has just been a hot topic that I've seen just intermittently brought up, even by the likes of Elon Musk, about the declining. In his case, he likes to talk about childbirth or birth rates, but marriage and childbirth rates declining. And I personally just feel like it's really framed like such a crisis. And it just doesn't, framed as a crisis, it seems more by conservatives, who want to promote marriage more and obviously having more children. And often, so two things bother me. One, that it's framed as this big crisis, and two, that the people they often blame are feminists. So that's why I kind of wanted to talk about it. I'm like, let's really dive into this. Is this really feminist faults? And is it really a crisis? So I'd love to, I don't know. This is such a huge topic. Wherever you'd like to start, we can start. I mean, actually, I do often like to start with you telling us a little bit about yourself. If you'd like to share anything else besides what I shared in the bio, feel free.
Sure. And I think it's relevant, especially to this subject matter. So as you said, I'm a former attorney and I work as a high conflict divorce expert and a coach. And just if you want to know, my website is highconflictdivorceexpert.com. That's where I can be found. And I became interested in family dynamics and the rights of children at a particularly young age, because I was raised in a very traditional family with a domineering father who saw women as second-class citizens. And I ran away from home when I was 16 years old. I ran away from home due to his abusive nature, and I never went back. So I petitioned the state to emancipate myself at the age of 16. And then I subsequently put myself through college and law school. And it's important to note that even though I had this patriarchal, domineering father, my mother also worked. And she worked in banking, and she actually earned more money than my father did, as well as doing the majority of domestic tasks like cooking, cleaning, child rearing, while he essentially sat back and barked orders at her. Mm-hmm. So that experience certainly informed my interest in the modern gender dynamic discussion, the modern marriage and family discussion, and the other topics that we're going to be talking about today.
Wow, I'm so glad that I remembered to ask you about your background, because that is fascinating that you became basicly, I'm sorry, what was the term you used? I mean, you were independent. Emancipated. That's right. Sorry, I blanked on the term. Yeah, at 16, how brave of you. It must have been very oppressive at home for you to do that. And even more impressive that you did all this on your own without family support, becoming a lawyer. So kudos to you. Amazing. And I think you're an inspiration. I think your situation that you described about your home life is, yes, a big part of this topic, a big part of what women are struggling with right now. They're often the breadwinners, like your mother was. And even if they're not the breadwinners, they're contributing to the household, sometimes 50-50. Even if not 50-50, they are doing the majority of the housework. We see so many articles on that, like every other week. So it is just a recipe for dissatisfaction, And I guess we should start with that. The accusations that conservatives have that feminism is the problem, when really, in my opinion, I feel like it's what's happening right now. Like women are stepping up in the workplace. We're really being equals to men in the workplace. And yet at home, they're still being treated like, second class citizens and pulling much of the home labor and childcare, taking more responsibility for that.
Absolutely. And I think to blame feminism is such a simplistic response. There are so many factors that go into why marriage rates are falling and why the fertility rate is falling across the world in many countries. To blame it on feminism seems like scapegoating at its finest. We absolutely can't just pinpoint this one thing. There's a reason that women are going out into the workforce, not only because they're human beings that have interests and things they want to do with their lives, but a single income household is not particularly sustainable anymore. So I'm not sure what the folks that are pointing the finger at feminism really expect women to do. In a way, I feel like the expectation is for women to not be human. And by that, I mean, if you have a daughter, you will watch your young daughter go to school, get interested in things, whether it's math, science, art, English, writing, whatever it is she's interested in, and formulate dreams of what she wants to do with her life. And can we really expect a girl, when they become an adult, to suddenly set aside all of their passions and interests and say, oh no, because I'm a girl, I'm going to take a hit for the team and not follow any of my passions and interests? I mean, you're basically asking her not to be a human being. And in addition to not following passions and interests, if you're asking women not to be in the workforce, you're also asking them not to care about their family's livelihood. In this day and age, like I said, families can't get along with only one income. So are we really going to ask families to do something that's economically unsustainable or ask women to do that? It doesn't make any sense. It's, like I said, a very simplistic way of just blaming something. Oh, let's blame feminism.
True. I mean, yeah, you made two really good. I want to talk about two different things you talked about. So true. I love how you phrase that. Like you're expecting women not to be human and not to have brains and interests. And we also get interested in different things and have passions and then right. And I think, you mentioned like you expect your daughter to go to school and then not develop interest and not want to pursue some career or some passion of hers. That's really bizarre. And that sort of made me think, oh, I mean, I'm not saying all homeschoolers have this agenda, but I do feel that some homeschooling, this rise of homeschooling is a lot about controlling what your children learn, and they're able to control what their daughters and sons think, and kind of mold them into what they would like. So I do feel like that it is a very, often this conservative right movement does have a agenda to push their religious values on, their traditional values on everyone. And part of it, unfortunately, I mean, I'm not just saying only Christian religion, but a lot of religions do want to control women and not regard them as individuals and regard them more like helpmeets. Is that the term? Helpmeets for men, And that just yeah, that's enraging. I mean, and no wonder men have so much success, right? Because not only are you allowed to just worry about your passions and dreams and pursue them, but you are assigned or by this culture with a woman to help you with your goals and dreams. So the fact that women succeed in this world without having a helpmeet of their own is kind of astonishing. It's really amazing that women do all these things. We don't have as many advantages as men, like the little helper, like a little wife, a religiously, culturally sanctioned wife, a stay-at-home person. And then the other point you made, yes, I mean, they want to blame feminism and women's education and women getting too uppity and wanting wanting more than they deserve, I guess, wanting more than to be wife, homemaker, and mother for the problems going on. But no, is that it? Sometimes I get suspicious that it's a distraction by the powerful elite, because we have terrible income and wealth disparity in this country. It is so unfair and it is so ridiculous. It is difficult for families to get married and have children. Women do look for safety when they get married. They don't want to be taking on relationships where they're going to not be able to say, if they want to have children, be able to take 6 months off because their partner is living paycheck to paycheck. Is that a woman's fault? Isn't that just smart? Is that a societal problem that we haven't, that we have this going on? It's not the right environment for people to encourage marriage and childbirth.
Yeah, absolutely. And an article just came out today in The Atlantic. I haven't had a chance to read it completely, but the article is entitled "American Women Are at a Breaking Point." And they're highlighting in this Atlantic article the new book by Jessica Calarco, if I say her name right, called "Holding It Together: How Women Became America's Safety Net." And again, saying, oh, it's feminism, it's such a simplistic way of looking at it. Because if you go all the way back to the 1930s, you go back almost 100 years to New Deal policies, and you start looking at the policies in the United States and how they morphed and changed in the last 90 to 100 years, what we see is that the policies in our country have not kept up with what's actually happening. So we have more than 50% of the workforce, more than 50% of American jobs are taken by women right now, right? But there's still this expectation that every family has some sort of free source of care at home.
Right.
And the presumption is that that's a woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that the women have essentially taken the place of any kind of social safety net. We have a very thin, very sparse safety net of any kind in the United States. And so who takes up the slack? Women do.
Right,
Women are the people who do like what my mom did and go to work and bring home the bacon, but also come home and do the cooking and cleaning and childcare. And not just childcare, but taking care of elderly, sickly relatives as well. Women are essentially doing the work that governments do in some other countries.
Right. I mean, that is such a good point. I think that is one of the things I have the biggest problem with is we don't have a safety net. It is shameful that such a rich country has so many living in poverty and paycheck to paycheck. And this topic is really more about that than women, what women are doing. And like you said before, women are just, what do you want to do? Have your children starve? You need your bills paid. You need the lights on. You need food on the table. So women do have to work because right now it's unsustainable. And like most men cannot afford to pay for an entire family, alone. I agree. I personally like what they're doing in some other countries. They have higher taxes and they have more social safety nets. And people do feel safer to have families, get married and have families. And I think we don't have enough childcare subsidies or, allowances. We don't have good parental leave policies. We don't have a plan, for elder care, like you said. And yes, that book is also on my reading list because it's true. Women are the default, and people are getting mad because women are calling that out. That's what they're really mad about, is that women recognize that they are being used and abused and expected to do free labor, and it's impossible. So,
well, and the question that is at the heart of our topic today is, why are marriage rates declining? Why are the rates of fertility declining? Well, I think the younger generation of women is looking at the older generation and what they've had to do, and they're saying, why would I sign up for that?
right,
Absolutely, why would I sign
right.
up for that? It's interesting. I have a guy who does house sitting for me, and he's a younger man in his 20s. He's out there dating, looking for a wife, right? And he runs into young women his age who are saying, I don't want to have kids. I don't want to get married.
Yes. Yes.
And so I've gotten in some great conversations with him about, well, why is that? And if they're looking at the women of the prior generation, like me looking at my own mother, why would I sign up for that? That's a terrible job, to not only have to bring in money because
Right.
it's economically necessary, but then also be shouldering the lion's share of the burden domestically. And not just childcare, but, we hear a lot about emotional labor, or I like to call it
Yes.
executive functioning.
True.
Somebody who is doing all the executive functioning in the household. Like, what is it that we need? What are we out of? What do we need to buy? When are the doctor's appointments? What's the family calendar? Who's putting together the family calendar? Who's planning the vacation? Who's, booking the hotel when we go somewhere? All of those things. Who's going to bring the car to go get serviced? Someone needs to be doing all of that. And that's a job in and of itself. It's like being
Yes.
a massive
Yes.
administrative assistant. If you're doing the lion's share of all of that and you're working, or if young women see that that was the gender role of the women that went before them, why would they want to get married? Why would they necessarily want to have kids? I mean, they probably want children, but they don't want that horribly stressful life that comes
yes.
with having children.
So what I was going to say is, isn't it funny? Like, we talk about, not we personally, but society, and a lot of these men online or elsewhere will act like, men and women, I guess, will act like being a stay-at-home mom is not work. It's actually the hardest work, 24/7. Of course, young women want to go out and work and not have children. Like, at least you go and you do your job, get a paycheck, you actually get paid, and you can come home and relax. There's no children or husband to take care of. I can understand that. And actually, it just reminds me of, like, is declining marriage rates really something to be alarmed about? Like, why have we, it just leads to a bigger philosophical question I have. Like, why is it a big deal that marriage rates are declining? Why is marriage needed? Is marriage really needed? Isn't that an institution put upon us in order to control women? That's what I kind of tend to think of it as. Like, it comes from religion and it's a way of locking down a woman. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. That goes to a question you raised at the very beginning of our session here together, where you said, is this really a crisis?
Yeah.
Well, I think that depends on who you ask, and it's a matter of perspective. Is it a crisis? And there's kind of two parts of that, because is the decline of marriage a crisis, and then is the decline of population that comes with lower fertility rates a crisis? And we could probably talk about those two separately. Yes. But as for whether the decline in marriage is a crisis, I don't see it as one. A big question arises: what does marriage really mean anymore? And I mean, from my work as a high conflict divorce coach and a divorce expert, I have some thoughts on that. Marriage doesn't mean what it used to mean. Marriage used to mean you're in it forever. probably the long haul, probably your whole life or until death really does do you part. But that was held in place mostly by economic necessity.
Right.
Women,
Couldn't even have bank accounts or own property. So yeah, it's like kind of a way of women kind of had to attach themselves to men in marriage. And that's why maybe in previous generations, women were maybe desperate to marry, because how else do you guarantee your livelihood without a man? And so it makes sense that now that women can, be out in the workforce and earn their own money, that they might want to just have not get married or have children.
I think marriage has gone, at least for women, from being a necessity to being something you would enter into because it adds value to your life. And by adds value, I don't mean economic value. I mean personal value to your life. Mm-hmm. So women didn't even have a legal right to work until 80 years ago. Women didn't have a right to be free from harassment in the workplace until 50 years ago. They didn't have a right to not be fired from their job when they got pregnant until the 90s, early 90s. So for all those years, as you said, women had to attach themselves to a man just to survive economically. I mean, when I was born, like you said, women couldn't even have their own checking accounts. Women couldn't get a loan in their own name. I mean, this is in my lifetime. Right. And I think people forget that. I think especially maybe young men are not, and young women too, but probably more so young men that aren't that interested in this history, don't realize that this is not that long ago. So as I was saying, I think marriage has gone from this necessity to a thing that women look for because they want a life partner, a best friend, someone to walk through life with them and support them. And so the game has sort of changed. Right. And I don't know that that's a crisis. At least it's not for me. I don't think it is for women. It may be seen as a crisis by somebody, but not by me.
I agree. I mean, it seems like this is more of a theme on the conservative right and the manosphere type guys, because I do think that, they are not all men, but some men do want to take advantage of women, in various ways, for the household help, for the childcare, to have children with, to help them advance in their careers. So yes, the culture is changing. And yes, another thing you talked about, I agree with you. I don't think, people are cohabitating. You can have a lifelong partner. You don't need to get married. That's not a crisis, in my opinion. But then the second part of that, like we were going to revisit, is the declining childbirth rate a crisis? I mean, I find that sort of, I have a little difficulty with that as well, because, the environmentalists will say we're overpopulated and there's too many people on Earth and this is not sustainable. And so, but these people who scream about the birth rates declining and that being a crisis will say, well, we're not at replacement levels and the economy can't function. And, and I just think, well, this is how the world is evolving and this is nature healing. So I don't know, maybe that sounds a bit like fatalistic, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was just having that thought this morning too about, is this just a natural correction where the species, we as human beings, somehow know innately that we need to slow down? So, I mean, this is a crazy statistic that I recently read, that the human population has doubled in my lifetime. I didn't even realize that.
Right.
Back in the early 70s, we had 4 billion people on Earth. Now we have 8 billion. In my lifetime, world population has doubled. So that's crazy. And I grew up at a time when people talked about overpopulation as a problem. And now all of a sudden we're talking about, oh no, we're not at replacement level. And yet we know that wildlife populations have plummeted by, I think, 69%. Humans have altered 70% of the Earth's land. We're occupying and altering 70% of it. We've polluted our air, our water, our soil. We've overfished our oceans. So is having fewer people really that problematic? I think people can adapt. The sorts of problems that people point out are like, oh, well, if we have fewer people, we're going to have to close schools or close facilities because there will be fewer people using these facilities, close sports facilities, theaters, old folks' homes, schools. Okay. So basically what you're doing is taking more urban areas and kind of condensing them down to be almost like more rural areas. And that's not the end of the world, because this cracks me up. I live in a place that has been traditionally pretty rural, that is exploding in population. So I live in, I almost shouldn't say it out loud. I don't want people to know. I don't want people to know and come there.
Okay. Yeah. No, we got the message.
I live in one of these places that people were moving to in droves during COVID. And the folks that live there, the locals, are incensed. They don't want more people coming there. And yet many of them are also the same conservative people who would complain about the drop in birth rate. So my thought is, they like to have their small town atmosphere, but they still want people to be born. They just want them to go live somewhere else.
Right. Where?
There's a little bit of there's an inconsistency here. I don't think that going back to kind of a more rural, smaller town environment because of declining populations is the end of the world. I mean, people are leaving LA, San Francisco, New York City, leaving the major cities to go to more rural areas. So how can we also complain about population decline at the same time?
Yeah, it's really unsustainable. I love the points you were making about the environment. I mean, we're kind of an invasive species. It's out of control. And I'm not saying do anything about anyone living and existing. We should take care of each other. But there are other ways. You don't need to birth more children in order to take care of the senior population. We could just all collectively take care of the senior population. We don't need to, like, for them to have grandchildren take care of them. Like, why don't we care as a society about everyone, right? Again, back to safety nets. And of course, capitalists like Elon Musk want, to promote this idea. You can debate. Do you want more workers when there's AI coming and you don't really need so many workers? That doesn't make sense to me either. And also, or do you just want more consumers? Are we just birthing more children so you can have more consumers for your products? Is that what's going on? Or is it like, are we just birthing more children to have more of these wars so you can just make more money on your Boeing stock? Like, I don't understand what the motivation is. And I just do think it is something insidious like that, because it doesn't make sense. I think people should, it's also contrary to our entire way of life in America, our philosophy, which is about individualism. And it's like, why are you at a government or population? Why are we talking about government level or population level control, of the population, just why, didn't we see that China's one-child policy backfired stupendously, and then in India, there's this, not that there's a policy, but this whole culture of valuing men more has increased femicide over there. And now, you have more men than women, like interfering, with the masses and their perception of what is going on. That just doesn't make sense. You really can't predict the future. Perhaps these declining birth rates are healthy, right?
Yeah, I think that rather than blaming feminism for fewer marriages and declining birth rates, I think it'd be more appropriate to look at capitalism. Actually, it's the capitalist policies in the United States that have led to the economic situation we're in today, and also the environmental situation we're in today, that is causing the younger generation to not want to get married, not want to have more kids. And so it's almost counterintuitive to take an Elon Musk approach and say, no, we need to keep consumerism going. We need to have more babies so they can continue to consume and continue to buy things. And a lot of them say, the more people we have, the more innovation we will have. I'm not sure I buy that, because we had amazing innovators 120 years ago at the turn of the last century with a fraction of the world population. I don't think we need more people to have innovation. And it's like I said, it seems counterintuitive to push capitalistic, consumeristic policies when those are the same policies that have created the economic need for women to work. Not that I don't want women to work, but the economic need for both people to work so that it's less sustainable to have more kids. So how are we going to cure the problem by doing more of the same thing? That doesn't make sense to me either.
Yeah, I want to kind of dive into that more, like why, why this is happening. I don't, for example, wage growth. The cost of living has increased, the wages haven't followed. Housing it's getting very difficult in urban areas, for example, or really anywhere. My kids are in college and they sometimes joke about whether they'll be able to own a home, et cetera. And that's just sad. Like we just took that for granted that we would be able to own a home. But now it's getting outrageous, real estate properties, or even just finding a home you can rent. Even rent costs are outrageous. Yeah, these are things they could be doing and working on, but they don't, right? So, I feel like that's what we need to point out more. It's like, if you really cared, we should fix these things. We should have a safety net. We shouldn't have people living in poverty. We should be taking care of our elders. We should be making more affordable housing. We should be raising the minimum wage. We should be, make salaries go up with the cost of inflation, controlling inflation. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I guess it's just something to push back against,
Well, I think you raise a good point that if we want to cure this supposed crisis, which I'm not sure it's a crisis,
right?
But if we want to make it easier for people to have more children, then we need to make it easier for people to have more children, which means they need to be able to have a home to put their children in. They need to make a living wage. The fact that our minimum wage, our national minimum wage, I don't even know what it is right now, 7 or 8, is it even $7 an hour?
I'm going to look it up.
No one can live on that. There's, as I said, I live in a place that has traditionally been relatively rural. I mean, I wouldn't call it rural now, but 30 years ago it was. You can't live there on minimum wage. The average home cost where I live, the median home cost is almost $1 million. And the average salary is about $65,000. There's absolutely no way a regular person, particularly one that doesn't have a college education and a high salary, unless they happen to start a fantastic business without a college education, there's no way that they can afford a home. And they know that. So, of course, they're going to be terrified to have children, right? So what's interesting, though, is that if we reduce the population, we're going to have less demand for housing and more supply, which should drive down the cost of houses and should drive down rents and make them more affordable. So actually having fewer people should help this economic situation. And there was at least one study where researchers found that lower fertility rates could result in a per capita income increase of 10%. So again, I'm not sure why we're pushing for more people, because that doesn't sound like it's going to solve the problem. But instead of pushing for people to have babies, notwithstanding circumstances, maybe make it more appealing to have children. So, I mean, one of the things we know is that women, by and large, get shouldered with childcare responsibilities. So they are more often the ones that take time off when children are born, and they never make that seniority gap, which translates to a pay gap. ever in the course of their entire careers. So, I mean, I'm one of those people. I took 7 years off to raise my son when he was little. I will never make as much money as my son's father because he didn't have to take time off. He has 7 more years of work under his belt and he always will. So what can we do as a society to make sure that women don't take a financial hit? Or not just women, but any parent who takes maternity, paternity leave, takes parental leave. What can we do to make sure they don't take a financial hit? What can we do to even get them more leave so they can go take care of their children and get paid for it? I mean, here in the US, you get 12 weeks of family medical leave, but it's unpaid.
Right. That's ridiculous.
In some states, right. Well, I was going to say in some states, there are ways of getting paid, like in California, but then in other states, you're not going to get paid at all. So it depends on it's state by state policy. Right. And then you go to Norway and you get a whole year off paid.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. You made so many good points. So I did Google the minimum wage. Okay. This is terrible. In where I live, it's $15 an hour, but the federal minimum wage for covered non-exempt employees is $7.25. So some states out there, that is the minimum wage, which is
$7.25.
Which is so disgustingly low. How can anyone survive? How could you ask a woman to marry you making that? How could a woman say yes to marry, or how could a woman even seek, a husband herself when she, like if you're going to live on that? Who can live on that? Who wants to have children in poverty? You're going to be in poverty, yourself. You're just living paycheck to paycheck. And of course, I'm just thinking of, this is the absolute wrong environment, of course, to, take away abortion rights too. Like you're literally jeopardizing people's lives, Anyway, sorry. And
no,
go ahead.
That sort of raises the issue of the fact that we also don't have reliable healthcare. So if you're making minimum wage, that is less than $15,000 a year. At $7.25 full time, you're making less than $15,000 a year. And then if you look at what just healthcare alone costs, healthcare premiums, I mean, it goes back to what I said and what you were mentioning about, is this just a natural correction? Human beings just knowing innately this is unsustainable?
Not safe. It's not safe for me to get married or have children, right? I can barely survive on my own, right?
Right. Because humans, of course, have this innate need to care for their young. And if you know you can't feed your young, you can't provide them health care, you can't provide them decent childcare while you go to your job that only pays you 15 grand a year.
Right.
You're just going to know that it's not sustainable.
Right. I mean, we don't have a healthcare safety net either. And that is a tragedy. And like one health problem can just ruin your life, put you in debt, So it's really scary the way people live, like that salary level. You can't afford to even get sick. You can't afford really anything. So it's really crazy to question why people aren't getting married or have children. Like you have your answer right here. And I loved your point before, to return to that point. Yeah, even childcare expenses are so much. So oftentimes when you earn this little, it makes more sense to just stay at home with the children than pay someone else more than you even make. So why would people want to have larger families? Why would people have, children at all? So, and I think a lot of people, women, like you said, take a hit career-wise. I do think someone does take the hit. Shouldn't it be both men and women with their career? When you have kids, they have things to go to. You have doctor's appointments. They have after-school activities. Someone does end up taking a hit. Everyone cannot afford nannies. In fact, most people cannot afford nannies, and it does end up falling on the mother often. And it should really fall on both. We should have more paternity leave policy, as what more paternity leave, and it should be paid for mothers and fathers. And you're right, like the duration is ridiculously short here too. So, any other thoughts on that?
I was just thinking there's an article that I read recently also from the Center on American Progress called Breadwinning Mothers Continue to be the U.S. Norm. And this article was pointing out the fact, and touches on what I mentioned earlier, that our policies and our societal expectations are still as if there's a stay-at-home parent. So you were saying somebody has to take time off to take the child to the doctor or whatever. The other thing that I noticed, because I was a single parent while my son was in elementary school, he went to a private school, and the school had all these half days where the kids just went to school half day. And then it had all these other days where the kids just didn't have school. And there was an expectation that you just had somebody who could take care of your kids. So what does a person do when they work full time? I was working not only full time, but more than full time as a lawyer. What was I supposed to do with my child when he randomly didn't have school on an afternoon? It's hard to even find childcare that can sort of fill in just a 4-hour gap this week and a 4-hour gap that week. So yeah, our whole society is centered around this old-fashioned idea that there's some kind of free labor available.
Yes.
And we don't have the kind of familial systems that they do in some, for example, Latin American countries, where oftentimes the grandparents might live with the family, and you maybe do have a free sort of source of care in a grandfather or grandmother being there. We don't have that most of the time here in the United States. The expectation is that young people get up and move away from their families and go live somewhere else, and they don't often have family around them. So not only do we not have extended family to offer this imaginary free childcare, but we don't really have women to offer it either, which is the expectation.
Right. I mean, this whole conversation has just got me thinking, like, yeah, what you said, like society needs to change. It's not women who should change. It's, how we structure society needs to come into the modern age of parents working and wages increasing, having more time off, allotting for flexible work from home, for example, and also childcare, having after school care, before school care. This should just be, either something paid, and it should be paid work. If women are going to end up doing it, that doesn't mean it's, your grandmother or your auntie does it for free. These women should be hired to do this work. If that's, we should put a value on that because it is valuable. Our economy runs on this free labor, invisible free labor. Yeah, that should be recognized. I agree. Let me see. We are kind of running out of time. So a few other things I wanted to point out were another thing is the childbirth rates have also decreased because of, modern advances like contraception, and teenage birth rates have gone down. That should be a good thing, and yes, women are pursuing careers and degrees and having families late. But is that terrible? Is it terrible to just have 2 kids versus 10 children like they had in the past? There's health risks to that. And, can you really do a good job as a parent? Isn't that even more expensive? Is that really, should be celebrated that we have less teenage pregnancy and that we have better, more educated parents raising a, smaller number of children well.
Again, I think it depends on who you ask and different people's perspectives. But you mentioned something that made me think about how parenting has changed. So you were saying, is it so bad that we only have 2 children instead of, like, my grandmother came from a family of 16, So
Wow.
16 brothers, I know,
Bless
incredible, right?
her. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was my great grandmother who had that many children. Is it so bad that we now only have two children? Well, the expectations of what kind of parent you need to be has vastly changed. I remember like one of the first episodes of the show Mad Men. I don't know if you ever watched it, but it's set in, mid-century.
Yes.
And the kids are running around with like a plastic dry cleaner bag over their head, and no one's blinking an eye, no one's freaking out. The parents are saying, no, go outside or go watch TV. And kids used to be just sort of shooed away almost as an annoyance like that. Whereas today, we're expected to highly, highly invest in our children's lives,
Mm-hmm.
to be extremely present for them. And because, again, let's go to capitalism, because of our very competitive society, we all worry that our kids won't be competitive in the marketplace, that they won't be able to get into schools, they won't be able to get the good jobs. And so we're putting them in all of these activities. And that's a huge investment on our part as well. So it's hard to even be the kind of parent that's considered a good parent in 2024 and have many, many children. That's the luxury of someone, I think, the luxury of families that have a lot of money, where someone can stay at home.
I mean, yeah. I mean, Elon has 11 children, but he can just outsource all that care and attention that he doesn't have time for running all his businesses. But we can't do that. So let's see. Another thing. Yeah. And the other thing is, I think lifestyles are changing. Like, I had children. I'm very happy I did. But I think that also is just something culturally that's shifted, like if you weren't married, if you didn't have children, it was I don't know, it was almost like shame was put upon you. And that is not the case anymore. It's fine not to be like a forever bachelor or bachelorette. It's fine to just want to work on your passion project and for that to be your baby. It's fine not to like children or have them. In fact, if you don't like children, you shouldn't have them. Or to just not, like children, but just think like there's enough children and I don't want to add to that. That just reminds me of some of these. Like, I think I've seen a TikTok with these or a few of them from the Dinks, double income, no children.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just living their lives and loving it. And I think so. People watch things like that and they're like, yeah, you know what? I would like to travel the world. That's what I'd like to do with my money. Or I'd like to work on this business. Or I'd like to, become a great artist. So whatever it is, like, again, that should be your choice as an individual, a human being with, your own hopes and dreams. We don't need to have to get married. We don't need to get married and have children to have a purpose in life.
And as a lifelong advocate for children, I will be the first person to say and reiterate what you said, that if you don't want children, you shouldn't have them. Absolutely. And again, juxtaposing the sort of 1950s, 1960s mindset to today's mindset, back then, a lot of people had kids because that's just what you do. And I don't think people necessarily stop to think, am I going to be a good parent? Do I really want to parent children as this active verb, to parent as an active verb? Do I want to do that? They just had kids because that's what people do. In fact, that's what my parents told me they did. They had kids because that's what people do, without asking, am I going to be a decent parent? So I would much rather have people stop and do that evaluation and not have kids if they don't want to make that personal investment in raising kids. And that's okay. Have a personal investment in, your passion project, as you said, or being a dog mom or whatever it is you want to do with your life. That's perfectly okay too.
True. Yes. I guess one of the last things I want to bring up, because we're running out of time, is that I have this, like, okay, call me a conspiracy theorist, but part of me feels like this is kind of a white supremacist agenda as well, because the decline of birth rate isn't I mean, yes, everywhere it's declining, right? But they are above replacement levels in some of these developing countries. It's not really a crisis for the globe, the world. And if we really dropped below replacement levels here, you could always have immigrants come in. But I think there's this faction of people who just want more white babies. Do you think I'm crazy?
No, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And I think there are also people who would openly say that.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, in the political climate in the United States since 2016, we've had very open racism where
Right.
people will outright say things like, this is a white Christian country. And I was on a jog the other day and I was thinking about it. I think a lot while I'm running. And I was thinking, wow, when I grew up, we used to talk about the United States being a melting pot.
Right.
And that was one of the
Right.
beautiful things. That was one of the beautiful things about America. It was the melting pot of the world. And now we have people who are saying things like, this is a white Christian country. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, what elementary school did that kid go to? Because
Right.
clearly not the one I went to where I was told this is a beautiful melting pot. So I
Mhm.
wouldn't be surprised if there are people that think that way, but I have faith that there are enough people who don't think that way. I have faith that there are enough people who would reject that wholesale, and I certainly hope so.
I do too. I do have that faith. And yes, I grew up like you. That was a real source of pride that we did have this melting pot and all different cultures and religions. And it is really bizarre what's happening now. So, at least the political discourse, I hope that the reality of the public sentiment isn't really like that. And it's just some really loud racist voices. So, let's see. I did get a couple of comments from the audience. So, let me just read those to see comments or questions. So, here's someone called Lurker on Twitter, so anonymous. For childbirth, I blame cost of living. Okay, we did cover this. Everything costs so much that most couples need both members to work to afford living. In such circumstances, raising little babies is a mildly traumatic experience. By the time you raise one, you're completely tired. I agree. You're spent. And we did cover that. You covered those points. I just want to look up. I think I got one online as well.
While you're looking it up, I was thinking about that last comment. The fact that I read another statistic recently that said back in 1974, 85% of households had two adults. And now that number is closer, I think, to 65%. So not only is it not particularly sustainable for only one person to work, but we don't have as many two-parent households as we used to have either. So
Yeah,
if you do only
right,
have a one-person household, how many children do you really want to have when there's only one person even there to raise them? I
right,
mean, when you don't have someone else to take up the
right.
slack.
Right. And that actually reminds me that some people are choosing that. I have a friend who has another friend who just decided to have children on her own. I mean, that's a common thing that if you don't find your lifelong partner yet, and your biological clock is ticking, you may decide to start your family or have a family. Yeah, lifestyles are changing, households are changing. So yes, like you really can't think of the traditional model as the one and only, And the divorce rate, we didn't even talk about that. I mean, the divorce rate is quite high. It's more likely you'll get divorced than stay married. Like,
Right.
so
It's
that's
40 to
something.
50%, 40 to
Oh,
50% of
I
first
thought it was,
marriages.
oh, okay. I thought it was higher.
And then it is
Okay.
higher because of second and third marriages.
Oh, yeah.
So it's
Yeah. The rate gets
40,
even higher, right?
mhm,
What is
it's
it for
40 to,
second?
I believe it's 60 to 67%. So 40 to
Wow.
50% of first marriages end in divorce, and 60 to 67% of second marriages end in divorce. And when I was speaking earlier about how what marriage is, or what the purpose of marriage is, has changed, I think we've stopped pretending that marriage is forever because we know it's not. So why do
No.
we
Yeah.
pretend it is?
Hmm.
And we also know that 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and amongst educated women, that's 90%. And why is that? And again, I'm going to go back to this societal expectation that women are going to be available to do all of this additional unpaid work, unpaid labor, as well as being in the workforce. I believe it's 60% or at least 60% of households with kids, families, to working parents. And then 25% of households are run by, well, it's 22 to 25% of households are run by a single matriarch. So you hear these men in the manosphere say men are providing. only 18% of families are provided for by a man alone. Wow. So even
that's not the reality.
The reality is that men, by and large, are not providing.
And that's a lot of weight to put on an individual in this world. This is not the reality. It's unrealistic. Stop saying those things. Either become. Men have to evolve and society has to evolve. I also think that reminded me what you were saying about how some of these women, on social media, you'll see posts on Twitter or these posts on TikTok where they talk about life after divorce and feeling like the women have more of a break after divorce because they no longer have this. Frankly, the men are sometimes like an extra child that they were taking care of. And because the man has designated time with his children, she now gets suddenly, a weekend off, which she never had before. So it's like an upgrade in lifestyle for the woman to get a divorce, which is a damn shame, right?
A lot of my female clients say their life is infinitely easier after divorce. The divorce itself is hard to deal with, but in terms of day-to-day life, their life is easier when they're just doing it on their own. And then if they're sharing custody, they get a break. They get time to themselves for the first time in years.
It's wild. Okay, I found the other comment. Okay, someone named Miranda M. said, there are a few factors. One, macro level, Bill Gates has stated that the more wealth and health increases, the less children people have. The nations that have the highest birth rates are the poorest in Africa. Even in the rich Gulf, Middle Eastern Muslim countries, the birth rates are not extraordinarily high, even though Islam tells people to have a lot of children. They are higher than the West, but still not as high as poor regions in the world. So Bill Gates' theory seems to be accurate. 2, micro level, women are not marrying and having kids because men are unreliable providers and protectors. If a woman can earn herself and have a decent or comfortable lifestyle, she's likely to downgrade to a guy who's beneath her in earning potential. A man has to add more value to her life, whether that is financially, emotionally, domestic labor, etc. Many women want to be stay-at-home moms, but men can't or won't be providers for such women. So women prefer to be single and not have kids. Taking care of kids is a huge, tiresome job. Many women want the option to be stay-at-home moms or work part-time, especially when their kids are young, but men are not on board in reality. Red pill men are bullshitters. Agree. They don't want to fully provide for women. Women who don't want a man to be the sole provider, but want a 50-50 relationship are realizing that men only want to go 50-50 with the bills and not childcare or housework. It's a bad deal. There is so much in unpaid child support arrears in the USA. Men abandon their families a lot. It's pretty scary out there for women. You never know if your husband could be one of them. Wow, fantastic comments from Miranda. Thank you. She touched upon a lot of what we were saying. Any additional thoughts?
Well, Miranda's echoing things that I also have said over and over on social media. And I think she's right when she says that men won't or can't provide. And I would lean more heavily on the can't. I think, sure, wouldn't every man like to make $500,000 a year and have a wife serve him? Of course. But the reality is that most people don't make that kind of money. And there are more women now in college than men. There are more women in professional schools than men. So I think that trend is just going to continue of men having less ability to be the sole provider. And that's okay. So then we pivot to what Miranda said about men needing to add some other kind of value to the relationship other than being the sole provider. And it's kind of funny, on my Instagram, I have a video about this, and the reactions were insane. So many men were offended by the idea that they would be asked to contribute something besides money, that they would be asked to contribute support, emotional maturity, parenting, good parenting, all of these other less measurable things that we want in a partner.
And that is something, oh my goodness, we didn't even get to touch upon, but women provide so much intangible value in relationships like this, emotional labor. And, when you try to talk about it, it's just discounted as, oh, that's just how women are. Well, maybe you should be like that, And
I got two kinds of responses on my Instagram. There were the men that were completely offended that I would suggest that they would offer something like that, or that women want that from them, like true partnership and emotional partnership. And then there were men that were saying, absolutely, that's what I provide in my marriage. We have a great marriage. We have a great partnership. There were women who stepped up and said, that's my husband. He provides that to me. I'm not with him because of his paycheck. I'm with him for the partnership. And so I think, as you said, there are some of the loudest voices out there that are the really negative, toxic ones. But there are certainly people that are on board with understanding that the modern woman wants a true partner, and that there are great men out there who will and can provide that.
Okay, so let's hope that is the way the world is turning. But we've kind of run out of time. So Jody, please share again where my audience can find you if they want to follow you, and maybe repeat your website.
Yes, so I am on Twitter at jwilsonlaw. That's J Wilson with 2 L's in Wilson. And my website is highconflictdivorceexpert.com. So highconflictdivorceexpert.com. I'm also on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok. And so you can find me there. And I have a new YouTube channel. I forgot to mention that. I just recently started my YouTube channel.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to leave with my closing thought. The patriarchy would like us to believe that declining marriage and birth rates are an extinction level crisis. But in the Gynarchy, we know that this is yet another tactic to gain control over women and their bodies and their freedom to live their lives as they want to. So down with the patriarchy, up with the Gynarchy. Thank you so much for joining me, Jody.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
Did you enjoy this episode of the Gynarchy Podcast? Know someone else that might enjoy this conversation? Make sure to subscribe and share the show with your friends and family. Find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and just about anywhere you find podcasts. On social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at The Gynarchy. Thank you so much for listening.